If that's all right, I think we can go ahead and get started and just keep letting people in as they come. Welcome, everybody, to our second Women in Security event. We have several very talented, intelligent speakers with us today, and we're going to cover various topics regarding gender inequality. So buckle up. It's going to be a great event, and I'm going to pass it over to our moderator for today, Thomas Brancato. Take it away.
Thank you, Amber. Thank you so much. And it's, welcome everybody to the Women in Security event number 2. As Amber said, I'll be moderating today's event, presenting the speakers, and of course, letting each of you have a chance of asking your questions or your comments towards the end of the presentation today. But without further ado, my name is Thomas Brancato, Internship Program Coordinator at the Global Counterterrorism Institute, and it is an honor to present some of our guest speakers today, including Dr. Gurpreet Kaur, Dr. Begum Burak, and Dr. Shireen. And we'll be heading over their profiles in a brief moment. But I did want to remark that this is the second event, but it's the first one that I'm participating in. So thanks to yourselves, Amber, and of course the speakers today for allowing me that privilege. So today we're going to be starting with Dr. Gurpreet Kaur, who's going to be presenting her first topic here and for the event. Now, I do want to remind our audience that the overarching topic for today will be how gender inequality impacts, or what its role is within terrorism and extremism. And we'll be coming at that from different angles, from different speakers, from different academics, and of course, from different perspectives. So I'm very excited personally to see the results. I've had the privilege of speaking with Dr. Kaur and of course with Begum previously, and you'll be notified of that as the CGTI will be releasing some promotional videos of what we call the fireside chats that accompanies this event today. So stay tuned for that. But without further ado, Gurpreet, it's an honor and a privilege to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Thank you so much. Can I share the screen now, or?
Give me just 1 second, Gurpreet, because
Okay.
I wanted to introduce you to everyone here who might not be aware of who you are and, of course, of your work. So just for a brief moment, Dr. Gurpreet Kaur has had a career change from academia to policy work, and she's currently pursuing her second master's in law, specializing in human rights, conflict, and justice at the SOAS, University of London. She's interested in the interconnections between gender, international law, and counterterrorism. To that effect, her thesis that she's working on currently is titled "The Figure of the Female Terrorist in International Human Rights Law." With a PhD in gender and post-colonial literature from the University of Warwick, in the United Kingdom, Gurpreet has previously worked on post-colonial ecofeminism, films and television, South Asian fiction, and media. She's published extensively in these fields, co-edited a book on Southeast Asia ecologies, and presented her research at several international conferences. She received her BA, Honours, and MA from the National University of Singapore. So Gurpreet, with that amazing biography, I'm sure you'll have an amazing presentation for us today. So without further ado, please take the stage.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Thank you. Just bear with me as I share my screen. All right. Okay. So good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Thomas, Todd, everyone, thank you for having me on this panel. I will be talking about gender inequality and the securitization of gender today. What I will do first is give you a quick run through of the structural factors of inequality, what is even meant by that, and how they have been exacerbated by historical factors such as colonization. And if the securitization of gender addresses these structural factors in a bid to put in place de-radicalization strategies. This is just a very, very quick run through of a topic in 10 to 12 minutes, which typically spans a few months if it is taught as a university course or something as a teaching thing. So I'm very, very happy to address any questions and at the end of the presentation. So what do we actually mean by structural factors of gender inequality? Structural factors refer to the unequal division of power and resources between women and men. This inequality is assigned through gendered mechanisms which are produced, reproduced, and maintained at the individual, societal, cultural, institutional, religious, familial, and state levels. EuroHealth, which is a website, and they released a policy report. They actually have a very nice quotation that sums it up. And they say, norms, values, and practices give rise to clear distinctions between the sexes and to allocating women as subordinated to men in most important spheres of life. For example, type of education, labor, market position, and unpaid duties, burden of care work as well. So basically, structural how societies are organized, laws are set, economies function, and ideologies are shaped. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to take you through two examples of structural inequality at the level of laws and legislation, and other two at the level that have their basis, such laws and legislation. I can't take you through every one at every single level, so just quickly. So the first one that I'm going to touch on are land laws. In a lot of the global south, but also in other parts of the world, women till much of the land for agriculture, but have no official rights to the land. Land is usually owned by men. Compounding this are caste and class factors, which further complicate the issue when land ownership is directly tied to access to global commons or resources such as access to clean drinking water. A lot of rural to urban migration happens, which sees a lot of men going to cities to work, which leaves behind the women folk, and they till the land. Now, if there is a lower caste woman who is tilling the land but has no rights to the land as ownership, she does not have a source of clean drinking water on her land, but say her neighbor, who is upper caste Brahmin and has a tube well which is clean, which has clean water, she basically cannot access that clean water. One, because she doesn't own any of the land. Two, she is lower caste. So you see compounding factors that happen when laws are in fact discriminatory. So the second one that I'm going to take you through are inheritance laws. So societal and cultural practices. So again, for example, in India, constitutionally, the rights of wives and daughters to inherit a property is recognized in equal capacity. Culturally, this is not practiced. So we have a situation of de jure and de facto laws, which are there. De facto practices don't take into account the laws that are constitutionally enshrined. And as a practice, what happens is that this is perpetuated over generations. This has actual implications because not just when a family member dies of natural causes, but implications when men die in armed conflict, battle, wars, and conflict. So men die, but people who are left behind, wives who are left behind, daughters who are left behind, effectively don't own land or property there. So the phenomenon that this gives rise to is actually termed as female-headed poverty. One, land, but they don't own the land. And two, because of inheritance laws, they can't own the property, their ancestral property or familial property. It is passed from husband to sons to brothers. So this is one level when what we mean by structural inequality. So second level that we're talking about is the wage gap. right? So this is clear-cut discrimination, mainly because of gender stereotypes. There are cultural attitudes towards men and women. Men are breadwinners, women are caretakers. Women's wages especially start taking a hit when they become mothers. A very, very good documentary on this was released. I think it was on Netflix. I'll pass on the title at some point if you all want it, but it specifically talks about how wage gap seriously widens. So around the world, we also have quotas for women in certain countries to enter certain professions. So Singapore, for example, up to 2004, had a quota for women to enter medicine. The quota was compounded by race quotas. So if you were non-Chinese, if you were Indian, there was only 1/3 of that quota for women reserved for you. So it was only in 2004, after much lobbying, that those quotas were removed. Next one, we have lack of political participation. So this is a photograph in front of you of ministers of foreign affairs of the US, UK, Russia, Germany, France, China, and the EU with Iran negotiating in Lausanne for a comprehensive agreement on the Iranian nuclear program as recent as 2015. Can anyone see a woman? I think there is one, but can anyone else see a woman of color? No. So this is a real structural issue. The structural barriers to entry usually are patriarchal socialization, gendered social roles, expectations, institutional infrastructure, working patterns, unaffordable or unavailable childcare, inadequate maternity or paternity leave arrangements, etc., poverty, economic dependence. Northern Ireland actually did a study which also cited intimidation, sexual abuse, harassment in women's roles in politics. I think that is not a secret. You know, it's not a surprise. All justice due to inequitable distribution of resources and power. Add to this mix health, reproductive rights, climate change, and we didn't even talk about domestic and sexual abuse and violence. So one of the things that when we talk about structural factors is that almost always women are treated as a homogeneous group. The fact is they are not. And it is fundamental to recognize that because they are not a homogeneous group, women face many different forms of discrimination in everyday life on the basis of race, ethnic origin, sexual orientation, age, disability. And they are amplified when they attempt to access or exercise their right to political participation. Moving on to historical factors, this is a map that I used in my teaching, showing European colonization of the world. The dark brown, maroon brown parts are, the British Empire. The reddish ones are the Spanish Empire, and the blue is the French Empire. Much of the terrorist and radicalization patterns that we are seeing, I mean, let's not talk about foreign terrorist fighters, but a lot of them are coming out in the areas that were formerly colonized. And once we move on to, say, 1914, we have the mix of Japan and the US as colonizers as well. So how does this tie into structural factors of gender inequality? So there is a phenomenon called as the double bind of women, patriarchy and to colonization. Colonialism actually intensifies patriarchal oppression. Edward Said's Orientalism is instrumental in how colonial attitudes developed towards natives. Native men especially, were viewed as noble savages, brutish, infantile. This actually brought about the binaries of us versus them, West versus the rest, that is entrenched so deeply in a lot of the talk that we do. The feminization of Eastern men excluded them from practicing democratic rights, as they were not believed to be responsible enough to hold a democratic state, requiring a paternal colonial presence to properly govern the country and the people. And one poem that exemplifies this is Rudyard Kipling's The White Man's Burden, which is, aptly shown here, the white soldier carrying the noble savage. So what then? Gayatri Spivak in Can the Subaltern Speak uses this phrase. She says colonization basically at the heart was white men saving brown women from brown men. This was used in reference to the practice of sati, which is widows burning themselves on the pyres of their husbands, which was characterized as a very, very brutish practice of Hindus in the whole of India, when actually it wasn't the whole of India or the whole of Hindus. It was just practiced in one part of India, which then became amplified as, oh my God, these are noble savages, look at all the savagery they're doing. And Frantz Fanon, who wrote Wretched of the Earth, that was the first study that actually combined psychoanalysis and looked at how violence affected men's psyche. And he cites the powerlessness of local men that intensified patriarchal domination at the domestic level. So although men on both sides of the colonial divide were engaged in strife, they often collaborated in the domination of women. And what you had were new forms of patriarchal domination that was introduced. And indigenous peoples were subjected to genocide, economic exploitation, cultural decimation, political exclusion. Africa has the legacy of the transatlantic slave trade and colonial laws. Section 377A, which is the Victorian law penalizing homosexuality that was exported to all British colonies, which a lot of them are still contending with. Singapore still has that in place. None of them had laws that actually outlawed homosexuality or any type of other, gender slippages that happened. So a lot of the colonization at the heart, it is inequality is at the heart of colonization. So unequal relations of power, which have basically historically impacted gender and structural factors of gender inequality. So how does this all tie up with terrorism, radicalization, counterterrorism strategies, and the securitization of gender? The Women, Peace and Security agenda currently, there are 10 resolutions aimed at participation of women in peacemaking and peace building and preventing and addressing conflict-related sexual violence. So I've actually categorized them on the slide. And out of this, 2242 is the one that actually has a mention of what do we do when women get radicalized. And there's one sentence in one paragraph. I spoke about this at the first event that I was invited to. Face the problem and solution both in women. And it's a dichotomized, oh, you're the problem, but you're also the solution. And that gets perpetuated in everything else. There are also calls for gender mainstreaming throughout security mechanisms. So 2178, which is the UNSC resolution on foreign terrorist fighters under Chapter 7, paragraph 16 has a mention of empowering women. But every approach so far falls back on the idea of women as victims as seen through colonization. Women always need saving from something. Instead of having women as stakeholders or as decision makers, instead of actively engaging and listening to what women need in a given situation. Azadeh Moaveni, in her book, I have the book right here actually, it's called Guest House for Young Widows. She wrote a book on ISIS, the women of ISIS. She says that honestly dealing with problems of modern conflicts involves acknowledging awkward truths about how we have ended up with such violence in the first place. And I think that captures the whole gender inequality conundrum that we are facing today. Any measure that attempts to deal with gender inequality without considering the structural and historical factors that have led to such inequalities will fall short of hitting at the heart of the situation. There are colonial legacies to contend with in the form of laws of unequal wealth, of political exclusion of entire peoples. There are micro and macro structural factors to contend with that are exacerbated by local complexities. So an intersectional approach is required. And I'm going to leave you with the words of Professor Gina Heathcote. She's a leading legal scholar on women and security. And she has this to say, particularly with regards to UNSC Resolution 2242. The risk of progressing work on women, peace, and security within global structures without attention to the diversity of women's needs, lives, and experiences drawn from a feminist commitment to post-colonial listening is likely to produce a series of regressive outcomes that perpetuate victim feminisms and which fail to dislodge the intersection of gender with colonial and racial power structures within global institutions. Thank you.
And thank you so much for your presentation, Gurpreet. And that was fascinating, as I know that in the chat section below, there's already a debate underway. So we'll get to the questions at the end, directed towards your. For the time being, let's head over to our next speaker. Begum, are you here with us at the moment? I can't see your video feed. I'm not sure if there you are. Okay. Hi. Hi, Begum. So, Begum, thank you so much for joining us today. You are our next speaker, and so I'm going to briefly introduce you to our audience, and then after that, you can take the floor. Begum is a researcher who studies providing security in cyberspace from a gender-based perspective. And she's, among other things, studies the metaverse, information technology, and social media, and as main concepts that define today's world. Providing a certain degree of online safety for every internet user is vitally critical. Begum explains that problems such as cyberbullying, the hacking of emails, banking information, theft, internet addiction, and child pornography, gender-based perspective, and argues that gender inequality is one of the things that should be eliminated to tackle cyberspace threats. Begum is a graduate of Fatih University and a renowned academic and a publisher of works touching on social media, cyberspace, and gender inequality. But without further ado, Begum, please take the stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you for this great event. I'm very happy of being here today. Sorry, I think my Zoom application is not very updated, so that's why I look a little bit weird in front of the table among you. So I also want to share my screen. Okay. Yes, my. Oh, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Thank you again. Today, I want to briefly talk about cybersecurity, and I want to have a look at this concept from a gender-based perspective. Actually, it is a little bit complex to analyze cybersecurity because it has two sides. One is about the personal security in the cyberspace, and also there's another one related with the nation state level. So I want to make some distinction between them, but yes, I want to talk about these concepts. We know that the concepts like cybersecurity, cyberspace, and also metaverse, and other concepts like virtual reality, augmented reality. These concepts are really important in today's world, and we some degree familiar with this concept. So briefly, at the beginning of my presentation, I want to talk about the definitions of this concepts. Cybersecurity simply means security in cyberspace. Cyberspace is another key concept that we should define here. Cyberspace can be defined as a global domain within the information environments consisting of the interdependent network of information systems, infrastructures, including the internet, telecommunications networks, computer systems, and its embedded the embedded processors and controllers. Also, another definition of cyberspace can be made like this. I want to turn off my video because I think my connection is not good. Sorry. Another definition is about cyberspace is it is the interdependent network of information technology infrastructures, again, like including internet, telecommunications, and other online stuff. So what are the risks and threats on World Wide Web? As I said, the one side of the coin is related with the personal side of the security issues. The risks and threats on World Wide Web can be listed as the following. Like it can include password attacks, the problem of data privacy, online theft, stealing your personal bank account data or other information, user addiction, problematic social media use, and also user safety issues like cyberbullying are other problems and threats in cyberspace. Who are the actors in cyberspace? There are several actors operating in cyberspace. They are nation states, also corporate companies can operate, but also other harmful groups like criminal groups, hackers, hacktivists, or cyber terrorists are also other groups which exist in cyberspace. As I noted earlier, the threats in cyberspace also we can see it in this image. Like there are various threats like malware, spam emails, or business email compromise, the problems deriving from mobile apps, and so on. As I said, these are the combat these threats. We should keep our system updated. We should avoid links and the programs from unknown resources. We should use a secure connection, and also antivirus software in a diligent way. Also, we should implement strong passwords to provide personal security on internet. And what does gender equality has? What kind of role does gender equality play in this? In fighting these threats? As I said, these were the personal threats, but in terms of the threats which have a bigger, impact, not on personal level, but on the nation state level, like the cyber crimes, cyber terrorists, or other problems on internet. So why are in this war to provide a safer internet? Before that, I want to briefly define what gender equality means. Gender equality is the state of equal ease of access to resources and opportunities regardless of gender, including economic participation and decision-making, and the state of valuing different behaviors, aspirations, and needs equally, regardless of danger. We know that cybersecurity as an industry needs a greater diversity in its workforce. and women can add a great deal to cybersecurity, not only by diversifying the defender community, but also by closing the massive skills shortage and also shifting conversation around cybercrime and how to best tackle it. Gender-based solutions for a safer internet. Actually, this safer internet, as I said, it's not just on the personal level, and also for a better world, for a more for a safer cyberspace, which almost in a globalizing world we all use internet. So the security shortcoming of one person can also affect the security of the other individuals in the cyberspace. For example, if your email address is hacked and you can receive a suspicious link from a friend, then automatically this hacking will also affect your friends and other people's email boxes, let's say. Gender-based solutions for a safer internet. Here I want to make reference to the World Bank data and the report of it. The World Bank would like to initiate a global conversation on cybersecurity and gender issues and bring perspectives from different stakeholders to a common platform. And there are a number of purposes behind this initiative. First of all, the World Bank wants to highlight current good practices on how women are being included in cybersecurity. Also, in order to discuss the various challenges faced by women as cybersecurity professionals and internet users, the World Bank wants to seek possible ways to address these challenges. And also, it is important to define what governments, civil society actors, and other private sector players can do to make the space more diverse. In final remarks, I can say that gender perspectives are have to be discussed in a multilateral forum of multilateral peace and security forums. Cybersecurity, published by apc.org, and an international organization. It is noted that as gender affects the way people and societies use weapons, war, militarism, and gender analysis of international security, the gender, taking the gender into account and to take into consideration the women's perspectives is really important in order to get both the personal security and the larger security in the global space. Thanks for giving me this chance for my presentation.
Thank you so much, Begum, for sharing that presentation with us, and I'm sure that there will be many questions for you at the end. I already see at the end of our session, but thank you for sharing that, Begum. Many fascinating things to consider there as well. And well, our next speaker was scheduled to be Shireen. Sadly, Shireen Qudosi could not join us today, but we do have a video presentation that was sent to us by Shireen, very kind of her, and which we'll be sharing in a moment. But before we do, I'm going to briefly introduce Shireen as well, even though she's not here, for the audience that might not know her, and thereafter Amber or Todd, you maybe help me put that video up. Shireen's subject matter speaks about the World Bank Gender Inequality Inquiry, but there the supposition that it might be more inclined towards data and stats rather than theory and philosophy. So very interesting topic by Shireen, and without further ado, as an immigrant over and over again across 3 continents, Shireen has lived the themes coloring our cultural policy and landscape today. She studies migration, radicalization, and adaptation across seismic cultural shifts. Shireen has studied and spoken on Islamic extremism over the last 20 years, with a look at the full spectrum of extremist ideologies over the last 4 years. In 2019, Shireen grew deeply concerned about new eruptions of extremism and identity politics, and in 2021, alarmed by the normalization and acceleration of radicalization, she began establishing the Foundation for Human Belonging, a 501c3 reframing new feminine lens through which to look at the crisis of extremism and help communities develop radicalization resiliency. So without further ado, Amber, if you could help me set Shireen's presentation up for us to take a look at. And or Todd, I'm not sure who's doing IT today.
Yeah, I'm getting there.
Thank you, Todd. But in the meantime, Gurpreet and Begum, thank you so much for your presentations today. I already see that we've got some questions for you, so I'll be during the presentation taking a look at some of the debate that your topics have raised. I see there's already a lively discussion taking place. So thanks everyone, and just a brief reminder for our audience today, if you do have any questions, write them down. I'm taking a look at all of them. Even if I'm not responding, rest assured I'm going through all of them, and we'll be picking them out one by one and asking them for the panel. If you have a specific speaker that you'd like your question addressed to, you can just type in to Gurpreet to the speaker. But if you have a comment, or if it's raised a thought, or if it's stirred any kind of reaction in you, you can go ahead and type that in. I'm sure our speakers would be delighted to hear about the reaction. Just quickly, I know Jared has asked where Shireen Qudosi is. The next speaker, I assume you were referring to Shireen Qudosi, where she might be from. So I actually don't know where she is from. I know where she studied, but I don't know what her country of origin might be. So I dare not assume that, but I'm not sure if Amber and Todd can perhaps type that in the chat if they know the answer to that one. And Begum, I see that you've raised your hand. Please step in.
Yes, I have a question. Okay, I can ask later.
Thank you. Sorry about that, Begum. So just to refresh everyone, Shireen was sadly not able to make it for today's presentation in a video format. And so, Todd, thank you so much. Let's start that off.
Everybody can see the video now?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, that has no audio, Todd.
It is muted?
Yes, that's muted. Todd, what we might need to do is if you can unmute yourself. There we are. And hopefully that should work now.
Hi, my name is Shireen Qudosi. I'd like to thank Global Counterterrorism Institute for having me on today, and I'm here to talk about sacred feminine in de-radicalization and how the sacred feminine is a doorway into radicalization prevention and de-radicalization. So we talk about this idea of a woman's place is in the home, right? Joanna Cook had written a book on a woman's place, counterterrorism, 9/11. That sort of idea, for example, that a woman's place is in the home is such a powerful anchor, because it kind of brings us right back into why a lot of women join the extremist organization, like Muslim join extremist Muslim organization. And the idea is, again, as we discussed in the first panel, is this sort of idea of being in a traditional marriage, being married, secure, being in that traditional dynamic that does appeal to them, and why that appeals to them we discussed earlier. So to piggyback off of something that does appeal to someone from the demographic is a really powerful start. And I would say the conversation around the sacred feminine is not to bring these women. So let's say we have an ISIS bride, right? And even that terminology is still working, because we're looking at ISIS bride as just defining a woman within the ideological group she chose to join and her gender relationship within that organization. Like she is a bride. A bride doesn't stand on her own rights in relation to a man. So we're already using the wrong language when we're talking about these women who we want to save from extremist groups, right? And there's a way to do it. There's a way to bring them back, but we can't bring them back from a place of reinforcing the stereotypes that they have about the West, and also through the promise of the West. So, for example, if you tell these people you're going to be free, you're going to be saved, women's empowerment doesn't mean anything to these women. You have to work within what they know and what they know to be home. So, going back into the idea of, the tagline of women's place in the kitchen or in the home, I would say let's turn that and say, what does that actually mean? Like, where does that come from? The idea of a woman's place is in the heart. The heart, actually. I would say the woman's place is in the heart. And that's a really powerful doorway into looking at what does it really mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be feminine? And how do you take those ideas and sort of envelop them in the sacred? Like, how does that work? The idea of a woman's place being in the home is so powerful because it's that first sort of threshold that gets crossed between a common denominator in the East and the West, which is the idea of a woman's role. And when you look at the heart, you look at it in the context of or a home, look at it in the context of the 21st century. What does it mean to be what does home mean in the 21st century, right? So I think in the 21st century, we're still holding on to like a really archaic idea of what's home, that it is entirely rooted in the physical. Now, if you take that and you look at how Islamists look at it, they would actually agree. They would say, women are treated as homemakers and baby makers, so to speak. And my sense is that the home is greater than the world. That I search for home in all the ways that can belong, that we can belong. And I ask, why can't we stretch the definition of home? Why can't we deepen our lexicon without triggering people by attacking their faith? So if I'm speaking to a woman who is considering de-radicalization or has been or is or can even be prevented from that pathway, I would start with something that's so familiar. It doesn't require a thesis. It doesn't require knowing anything more than something more, right? A home, a heart, the sort of comforts of that. And then I would deepen that conversation to, what did home mean back then in the time of Islam's origin story, and what does home mean now? What can home mean? And what does home mean within the self, right? What does home mean in my body? What does home mean in relation to me, in relation to the outside world? And so rather than coming at a place where we're attacking their faith or championing one ideology like the West, for example, and its idea of freedom for women as the only thing that works, the only thing that has value, why not work within a construct we already know it and really just sort of broaden what that could mean? And in a de-radicalization program, that can be done through a lot of support mechanisms, support workshops, a lot of embodiment practices. I mean, there's so much that can be done if we really wanted to break apart what this would look like within a program. I would say it's so important to remember that when we're working within de-radicalization, we have to work within the faith rather than the And we can also say that Islam actually does speak to the feminine part, not fully, but enough to leverage de-radicalization of Muslim women. And we can do that, without shaming women for not wanting to be in certain schools. And I'll give that a really quick example of a story as I went to Death Valley. And Death Valley has these sand dunes, and they're nothing like beach sand. There's sand that you just sort of step into and sink into. It just comes up all around you like hot water. And it's awful. And I imagine that that's what it would have been like in, back in the olden days, in the early days of Islam, if I was a woman. That would have been my environment. And within seconds, my feminism happened. I said, I don't want to engage. That was my raw reaction, right? Not a popular reaction, but a raw reaction. I thought, I don't want to deal with warring in this environment. I don't want to deal with trading. I don't want to deal with hunting. I will happily give up my rights in exchange for comfort and security. And it's a very hard conversation to have with a lot of Western people, but it's an honest one because I'm saying that I wouldn't want to participate in that environment, right? So it's not that I don't want to participate at all, it's just that environment. And it's not that a matter of being lazy per se or not having the courage. I know myself enough to know that that is not a landscape I will excel in. I will suffer and I will take down anyone with me if they're depending on me for survival. I know that I'm better off in let's say the tent, right? But then a lot of the times when we have this conversation with Muslim men also, the conversation stops there and it's a marker of, oh, you're limited in capacity as a woman. But we don't again deepen the conversation as to, okay, well, what does it mean to be that? What are the soft skills a woman has, right? If a woman has soft skills, again, not to say that women aren't strong, but the conversation is the idea is that women are like flowers who need to be protected. Well, a flower can also be, has value beyond food. And even if we want to look within food, there is so much to say within the Quran, within the Sunnah, traditions of the Prophet, the things of the Prophet, where we can go and we can have these deeper, layered, heartfelt conversations from a place of history and theology and conceptual theology. And it doesn't have to be something that, again, distances a person who is coming from an extremist background or is considered an extremist background by talking down to them, throwing facts at them or shaming them for their ideas or shaming them for their behavior. It's really a conversation on belonging above and beyond absolutely anything else. And then beyond that, it's how do we take the idea of the the feminine being at its heart, that honoring the innate sanctity of the woman's mind, and honoring gender, not through some social construct, which would never be respected in this conversation with one extremist or a current extremist, but honoring gender through the divine, looking at the gifts that women have within us as and how those gifts are desperately needed in the world today. I think ultimately we have to look at reality beyond the individual, right? Beyond the perimeter of what we think is a safe conversation or a patterned conversation. So to go back to only talking about extremism and masculine lens is a patterned conversation. It's predictable and it falls short when we look at the full scope of where we can go with really coming forward in how we evolving in how we talk about extremism and the pathways we can create to get people off that track or to prevent them from ever getting fine. It's not a people problem, it's an idea problem. And at the heart of it, I think we all are invited to be curious about why good people join bad ideas and looking at every single conversation point, every single angle where that conversation can be had. And I think the sacred feminine, I believe confidently, the sacred feminine is one of those pathways. And it's not one of those pathways that's rare or fringe anymore. In fact, there were a couple of conferences this year alone, one in DC, it was a kind of a women's conference, and another one, the International Ministerial Conference on Freedom of Religion or Belief. Both had a gender equality component. The DC conference specifically mentioned sacred feminine. So these are not abstract, woo-woo ideas. These are ideas rooted in history. These are ideas that the book I can recommend was if you just reach out to me on social media or on my website, ShireenQudosi.com, for a list of some of those references or to have a deeper conversation on using the sacred feminine path to
Okay, thank you so much, Todd, for sharing that, and of course, thank you to Shireen Qudosi for that very enlightening video and for the topics discussed. There was a lot to say about the role of agency. Interesting, and of course, Shireen won't be here to answer the questions, sadly, but If any of our audience and or panel has a question relating to that, then rest assured that the rest of the panel is each highly accomplished and intelligent and academics and researchers that I'm sure would be more than happy to step in Shireen's place and perhaps answer some of the issues raised. So if you do have any thoughts, comments, or questions raised by Shireen's presentation, go ahead, type them in, and we'll take them up. But without further ado, Shireen, if you're hearing this as a later recording, thank you for sending that in. Very kind of you to share that video with us. And of course, we're sad not to have you here today, but regardless, the video did a great job. And so finally, our last panelist and also host of today's event is none other than Miss Amber Oquindo. Amber, well, it's great. If you'll allow me, just a short biography on yourself and the topic that you'll cover today. So Amber is a current research fellow and director of operations at the Global Counterterrorism Institute, which is hosting today's webinar. She earned her Master of Science degree in Homeland Security Management at the Homeland Security and Terrorism Institute, Long Island University. Previously, she earned her BA degree in Political Science at Pennsylvania State University. She has a strong academic background in terrorism, including extensive coursework in recruitment, propaganda, radicalization, and a focus on the use of social media for self-radicalization. Within her academic career, she has done extensive study and work on the role that media plays on terrorism, the radicalization process, and how to identify the signs of escalating radicalization. Amber is an expert in terrorism, recruitment, propaganda, and radicalization. She also works with nonprofit organizations to promote radicalization awareness, intervention, education, and the empowerment of marginalized communities worldwide, emphasizing the area of the Middle East. And today, Amber will be speaking about terrorism, violent extremism, and the initiatives that are put in place to counter it and continue to be male-dominated areas. The archetypes when discussing terrorism and extremism, the avenues for recruitment, and the action taken by the violent actors when viewed with the approach of predominantly male participants. So Amber, very interesting topic, and I'll let you take the floor with explaining the rest of it. Amber, I think you're muted.
Still muted. Yes, thank you for that introduction, Thomas. It was wonderful, and I'm so happy to have gone after all of these brilliant women, because a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today does touch on a lot of the topics that they have a different perspective and a different, lens of how we're looking at this issue. And really what I want to discuss today is that the roles of the female participants in rebel groups are often overlooked or neglected. And this is mainly because of that stereotypical view of women emphasizing their place as victims of terrorism. And that characterization has become pretty obsolete. But the male-dominated active roles in terrorism, the actions of women are still viewed as an aberration. They are not taken seriously in effect. And we have seen a surge in female suicide bombers, mainly used to subvert security measures in both secular and religious organizations. So when we take a look at the gender-specific demographics and radicalization metrics, there was a study done that reviewed 1,867 radicalized individuals within the United States between 1948 and 2016. And in this group, 22% of women participated in the far right, 15% in the far left, and 10% in the Islamist extremist activities. So there's no cut and dry corner you can place female participants that they only participate in one sector or another. Women who are participating in these activities, 33% were single, when you want to compare that to the 55% of men that were single and participating. And this was most pronounced in the Islamist and far right groups, where single women were active participants. Women also tended to have higher levels of college or vocational schooling compared to their male counterparts within this study. So really across all of these groups, only less than 1% had any military experience. So participation in these violent attacks, 60% of men took part in the planning, directing, and higher operational positions, whereas that was only 40% of women. And this disparity was most recognized within Islamist groups. And these percentages will make sense more as we go on. But really what this does signify as a starting point is there's no single pathway to radicalization. There's no single profile. It is not possible to create even a broad profile of females at risk of radicalization based on age, location, ethnicity, family relations, or religious backgrounds. Women join for the same psychological, personal, social, economic, and political reasons as men do. Many have attributed this rebelliousness and desire for action, drive for power, promise of adventure, attraction to politics, and a commitment to and these are all seen in the propaganda and recruitment process. They're calling on these motivations of both men and women equally, because they're calling upon those same needs that each male and female look upon and they're looking to be a part of. So as we talk more about the motivations of it, women usually join voluntarily. So their motivation includes personal grievance, religious and political ideology commitments, or socioeconomic needs. Women join overall with highly contextualized dependent motivations. There's no win. As was discussed earlier, females are seen as acting on emotion, or can, change direction frequently based on that emotional need. But yet when we look at women who have been recruited and radicalized, their motivation. Mia Bloom identified several key drivers for women involved in terrorist groups, which she referred to as the 4 R's plus 1. And those are revenge, redemption, relationships, respect, and rape. And women suicide attackers, for example, in the Israeli-Palestine context, were motivated by revenge, while those affiliated with the Sri Lanka Tamil Tigers, they sought to revolt against a repressive state policies. So we have different motivations here for different actors in different contexts. Studies have shown that women are more likely to participate in violent groups in repressive societies where they're deprived of freedom, political empowerment, or social equality. And so a higher level of a woman's social rights reduces the chance that she can be recruited and therefore radicalized. It does. And then conversely, higher levels of unemployment within the female labor force can significantly drive up the likelihood that violent organizations will be able to recruit female combatants. So there's a lack of socioeconomic opportunities for women, lower the cost of joining a violent group and be more tolerant of that cost associated with membership. And what this cost of joining this organization shows is the impact of social and political settings on human choices, and a willingness for women to pick up arms and support a violent organization. In addition to these broader motivations, women have joined due to personal grievances, a sense of isolation, the commitment to supporting the caliphate in reference to jihadist recruits, or just seeking adventure. And these reasons are reinforced consistently by recruiting more directly to a female audience. And we really see this super clearly in Bin Emergent's Twitter accounts, which are basically like a playbook for how to propagate towards women. Then we have the Center on Global Counterterrorism Cooperation. They stated several push factors specific to women recruitment, grievances about their socioeconomic and sociopolitical conditions, grief following the death of a loved one, and intention to receive economic benefits, or a desire to achieve a radical social change. And this gender-based inequality and discrimination, violence against women, and lack of educational and economic opportunities shut off doors for women to move outside of those organizations. And these violent extremist terrorist organizations feed off of that lack of opportunity and present the opportunity to these women for recruitment and propaganda purposes. And earlier I mentioned one of Mia Bloom's indicators or factors were rape. Women who have been raped will turn to become suicide bombers, for example. And this is mostly seen in societies where the rape victim brings on the shame to their families. If they are seen as the cause for that. And so they're looking for a way out. They're looking for a way to replace that shame that their society has placed on a rape victim and replace that with a positive one. So they're looking to be a martyr for the cause. And that has been a driving factor in several female suicide attackers. Women have been used to exploit these gender stereotypes to get past the security personnel, avoid detection, boost media attention, and shame men into action. And this is a way, again, that women are used, and they're used successfully because of the male-dominated perspective of counterterrorism measures. When we look more at the recruitment, we're seeing, again, women join for the same reasons as men do. And robust counterterrorism and preventative measures that impedes radicalization and recruitment needs to address women specifically, because as of right now, most of these measures, again, take women involvement as a blip, as an anomaly. It's not taken with the enormity that it really deserves. And when we look at what are these counterterrorism and preventative measures, that's delegitimizing extremist ideologies by strategic communications. They're blocking online recruitment platforms and reintegrating individuals into mainstream society. These measures should be addressed with a gendered approach, as women are recruited in various combatant and non-combatant roles in an ideologically diverse universe. Every single organization, whether it is secular, whether it is religious, whether it is violent, whether it is not violent, attracts and recruits women just as they do men. This is really exemplified by the Tamil Tigers, the Kurdistan Workers' Party. And when we look at 166 violent groups within Africa, women's participation was much higher with those groups that had gender inclusive ideologies. So women are flocking more to those violent groups than they are to those that have more conservative gender related ideologies. And the two women, Jacana Thomas and Kanisha Bond, who did that study, took their analysis one step further and looked at how the ideology affects a group's proclivity to recruit women into combat roles specifically. And when we're looking at 211 rebel groups that were organized, the leftist ideologies, which generally tend to attract female recruits, are more likely to employ women in combat roles. And these groups subsequently have a more lenient gender role identity. And the opposite can be said for Islamist groups, which suggests that women engaging in jihad were predominantly only to serve in supportive roles. And when we look at terrorist organizations around the world, when we're looking at female recruitment, the older and larger organizations tend to attract more females. And these insurgent groups that control territory are more likely to actively recruit females for the two main reasons that, one, women can deepen a group's links within the community of that territory, and two, recruiting women fighters boost a group's heightened operational need to physically protect their home base. So while they are still put in the corner of you're in a supportive role, they're still expected to take on an active role in defense of their home base. And this really highlights, again, the need for a counterterrorism perspective to be attentive to a group's age and operational needs, which can increase the inclination to diversify its human capital by expanding its recruitment and indoctrination of women. And women's recruitment and radicalization are usually the result and their broader socioeconomic and political environments. When these conditions are poor, it may contribute to a men's radicalization and recruitment as much as women's, but it's augmented by gender, as these conditions don't affect men and women equally. So poor socioeconomic or political conditions, while they may both appeal and be motivating factors for men and women, a man and a woman in that same circumstance will have two very different experiences, and therefore their motivations, while in the broader sense may be the same, contextualized, they're very different because men and women experience those challenges differently. And when we're looking specifically at jihadist recruits, because they have probably one of the more interesting evolutions of women in their organizations, the Islamic State has, and the global nature of transnational networks in the Islamic State means that trends in one region are going to trigger to changes in another. So women that are connected with the jihad are generally linked to those domestic roles: mothers, wives, sisters. They engage in fundraising and disseminating propaganda. Where we can take Al-Qaeda, which has largely followed gender-specific interpretations of the female jihadi, and their roles of women within their organization are highly gender-specific. Now the Islamic State has really shown to be much more flexible, and really the survival of their group demanded it. When they lost significant territory in Iraq and Syria, that mobilized the change for all women to take part actively. And this follows suit of the use of women in more predominant, the use intensified security and an increase in counterterrorism measures. So we see this shifting attitude towards female combatants elsewhere, right? Specifically in global affiliates. So a change in one area within that organization, its other affiliates elsewhere are going to see those changes, adapt, and change as well. We can see in December 2016, Indonesian law enforcement arrested a 29-year-old Dian Yulianovi. Sorry if I said that incorrectly. She was committed to being a martyr for the Islamic State. And she was arrested on suspicion of plotting a suicide attack on the president's palace in Indonesia. April 2019, for the Sri Lanka attacks, which were claimed by the Islamic State, they claimed the lives of 359 people, which included female suicide attackers. Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia really give us an indication that the total number of female participants who were captured or killed are steadily increasing. So they are taking a more active and a more visible role within their activities. So these organizations went from forbidding women to participate in combat to calling upon them to engage in defensive combat in 2016 to actively engaging in jihad for the caliphate by late 2017. So we really see this 180 shift in their use and their recruitment and their call to female participants. This alone has caused a cascade of other organizations to actively propagate towards women. We see it in the Tehrik-i-Taliban in Pakistan, has since released propaganda publications that openly solicit operational activities. This is the first time, and it happened in 2017, that this group has ever openly solicited to female participants. So we see this dichotomy within these two groups as well. We see groups that are simultaneously espousing extremely conservative views of women while still calling upon them and using these female attackers. When we move beyond the religious contextualized groups, we can look at Betty Shape. She was a former female member of a neo-Nazi terrorist cell group, and she was sentenced to life in prison in July 2018 for multiple murders, bombings, and robberies. So this example is telling of how far-right extremist organizations are known to recruit women, but in some cases, these groups are also catering to their female. Church of the Creator is a white nationalist group in the United States and overseas, and they have several chapters that are specifically for women. So this increasingly modern view on gender and sexuality are appealing to a wider audience, and at the same time that reduces the stigma of association. So that links back to the cost of being a part of this organization. It's lowering that cost as their views become more modern and more moderate. And we can look at, this is demonstrated for active participation and recruitment of women across the entire spectrum of violent extremist organizations. Social media and the internet media in general has allowed for greater participation for females to access propaganda material. And this also plays to the call that a lot of organizations are using cells. So propaganda that is targeted at women doesn't always have to follow the modern view. We have to keep in mind that traditional gender roles are still frequently used in recruitment and radicalization. So there's no, one size fits all for this. It is two ends of the spectrum that covers the entirety of these violent organizations. When we are looking at the, ISIS brides, they're using kinship and romantic relationships that can play an important role in drawing females into their organizations. These propagandists, they're usually aiming at contrasting negative narratives of a Muslim woman's experience in Western society with positive narratives about their contributions to a new state. So we see this a lot in the online grooming process to bring organizations. And this type of propaganda may not call for violence, but it does encourage an intolerant interpretation of religion or social norms with restrictive gender roles. So this indoctrination is then passed down by women to their children, to other family members, who will then more likely be supportive of more extremist views. So this traditional role that women are usually automatically cast into as caregivers, this role itself can really empower them to protect their cultural, social, religious values and pass that down to the next generation. And they do this through encouraging martyrdom and keeping an organization viable through consistent propaganda, recruitment, fundraising, and a myriad of other supporting activities. And where we see this the most right now is it's in a lot of women to women online recruitment, these online platforms, these groups that women are forming together within these male dominated societies and organizations. They're talking to each other and bringing in other women into their own organizations. So by not addressing a gendered perspective of the recruitment into violent organizations, states will continue to be lacking in its strategies to prevent the radicalization of anyone, but of women in particular. So we can really see that change where, again, it's on both ends of the spectrum, but it does cover all extremist groups in its entirety. Thank you.
Thank you, Amber. That was a very complete picture and a very Well, a lot to digest, I'm sure, and a lot to unpack, and I'm sure a lot of reaction from our chat that is thanking you for that amazing presentation. Of course, thank you from myself, and as I'm sure from the other panelists. Now, there was a few questions that in a moment we're just going to take apart for the moment, but I did want to take a second, not only just to thank you, but to thank Dr. Kaur and to thank Begum as well. Begum, I'm not sure if you're with us at the moment, but whenever you can. Oh, you are. Okay, great. So if everybody's ready, I might suggest starting with some of the questions that the chat has raised in the Q&A section. And the way I'll do it is if it's addressed to a specific speaker, it will go to you, towards you first. And if it's a more broad question, or if one of the panelists wants to step in, please go right ahead. And before we start things off, I did want to mention Jared Crockett had asked a question of the birthplace of the speaker. Sent a video in Shireen Qudosi, who unfortunately couldn't make it in for today. From what I was able to find through the website that was posted there, Jared, I believe she was born in Soviet Afghanistan with parents being, I believe, Pakistani in origin, Afghan-Pakistani family, and then from a young age moved to Pakistan. However, her profile states that she was a refugee in at least 3 different continents during her youth. So I'm sure Shireen, sadly, is not here to explain it a bit better, but I hope that that answered some of that background information for you, Jared. And well, the first thing I wanted to start with was a question directed towards yourself, Gurpreet, because I believe it was repeated twice. Once, question of, in your study, which countries specifically were being taken a look at. I think India is one that I remember you talking about, but were there any other countries in your presentation that were also being surveyed?
So I specifically looked at laws and policies, historically contextualized, particularly colonization onwards. And how it has affected a ripple effect of sorts with how it has engendered structural inequality, and how that keeps happening till today with neocolonial structures in place. So yeah.
And it's just looking at India specifically, or any other?
Not India, it's India, Philippines, Thailand, Africa, a lot of Africa, MENA region. In fact, when, I don't know if anyone knows this, with when British actually colonized India, they had the Indian penal code system, which was in effect, came into effect in 1860s. I think it was 1863 or 1864, which was then used as the basis for all MENA region. So Sudan has the IPC as its basis. That was transferred over to the settler colonies. So the whole of Southeast Asia that was colonized by the British. And a lot of the colonial laws are still retained in current day, the legislation. So you have a widespread from Egypt to, down all the way to Southeast Asia, India and Africa, just majorly known because they are the most cited countries when it comes to.
Gurpreet, thank you for that, and I think that should clarify that question for anybody who might have been wondering. And so, well, I have a comment here that Mariah Murray, I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, had put down, and I thought it was great because it touches on a theme that was in all of your presentations. And she says, I agree, women are seen as lacking political agency. The mass media have described women as being manipulated, motivated by love, and or largely as victims. And I think this is really important. And I think back of Amber, your presentation and your topic that you just did today, and I couldn't help but think from my position here after hearing the three of your presentations today, that a lot of the way we look at female terrorists is, in a way, it's difficult because it's colored by a lens that have elements of sexism and genderism that we carry in our day-to-day lives, because these issues are not resolved here in the West any more than they are in other places. And so I think the image or the archetype of the female terrorist tends to throw a spanner in the works of the way that we look at women more broadly speaking. And it challenges our perceptions. We cannot understand how a woman can have agency to commit a heinous act. And so we put them in these preconceived labels and boxes. So I think that's a really interesting comment that made by Mariah Murray. And so I'm interested in sort of hearing the panel's understanding of how our gender stereotypes and stereotypes we have towards women as being nurturers or caregivers conflates and conflicts with this alternative notion of the female terrorist. Sorry, Amber, perhaps we can start with you.
I guess I'll start. I think that it certainly is. It is not a one-face issue. It certainly is both sides of the coin, where this idea of stereotypes and gender roles reinforce that perspective is where we see it, like I said, when it's being reinforced in those specific gender roles. But with that comes the expectation that they will continue to push their ideologies, to groom their kids, family members, their communities as a whole in support of these organizations, whether it's a religious organization, whether it is, a far-right organization. As I think Shireen said, women are the heart of the home, right? Home, that's where your fundamental ideas, biases, perspectives are formed, is in the home. So that's where women can really show that traditional role being extremely effective. And on the flip side, where that really contrasts is that the more that women are leaving that traditional role, that traditional pigeonhole that they were originally put in, they don't have the framework is not there for women to participate in combat roles. So you have women entering a male-dominated entity, whatever that entity is, and now they have to figure out, well, where do I fit in? Because it can be something as simple as a bathroom. Their own bathroom in an organization when they are leaving. So you have this entity who's trying to bring in women who is outside of their original framework and trying to figure out and kind of push a round peg into a square hole, right? It's not always going to fit. But if you push hard enough and long enough, the entity itself and the women entering it will form together to create a cohesive unit, essentially. What that looks like when we're talking more broad in counterterrorism, measures, when we're looking at how to counter that, that's going to be a completely different story. But the perspective itself, I mean, that's at least a starting point that we can look at.
Thank you, Amber. And unless Dr. Kaur or Begum would like to step in, I'll just skip over to the next question.
I think, Thomas, you might be familiar with this. We had a fireside, chat with this. So I think one of the things we have to be a bit careful when we talk about, how social media has been used, how indoctrination happens, how grooming happens, is there's an assumption, exactly as Mariah has said, and this is forming a huge part of my work that I'm doing currently, is that there's a very, very big assumption that women are just kind of like sponges. They kind of sit there and they're just absorbing everything that's thrown at them. That assumption doesn't exist with men. So I was talking with Thomas, I said, when you actually talk about, a terrorist, the image that comes to your mind is a male, and the actions of that male are very rational. The violence is rationalized. What happens when you talk about a female terrorist is precisely. So there's a stereotype which says that women are supposed to be a certain way. Therefore, the violence is exceptional. And because the violence becomes exceptional, it becomes sensationalized. And when that happens, a lot of the rhetoric on why women do this is women are sponges, they're indoctrinated, they're groomed. And a lot of the nuances that happen with this are completely lost. They're completely lost. And what happens with Mia Bloom's framework also is when she talks about revenge, she talks about this. She's again, since exceptionalizing all of this, and it falls back on the framework of women act because they're personally injured. So the political motivations, the political agency is never accounted for. And women are not sponges, They engage, they choose what they want and they reject what they don't want. And exactly as you said, Amber, the thing is both men and women live in a society which is gendered. And those assumptions work between both men and women, and how women then get affected, they're just particularized. But the reasons almost always are the same as men, exactly as you said. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to add a little bit onto that, Gurpreet, I 100% agree, is that when we look at male terrorists, right, it's more of seen in they have these grandiose, political aspirations, and they're going to overthrow a government, or they're going to do this or that. But then when we flip the script and look at a female, it's, oh, well, how was she injured? How was she involved? How, what happened to her? It's extremely personalized, whereas men it's externalized. So I completely agree with you on that. Yeah, 100%.
Okay, really interesting exchange between the both of you. But switching topics a little bit, here we have a question from Alyssa Scoringer, or Scoringe. Sorry if I butchered your last name there. And she wants to know, directed towards Gurpreet, structurally, what do you see as the highest priority to address desperation in activation, and where in terms of urgency? I guess that relates roughly to doing your presentation, speaking about efforts and to de-radicalize, and I would imagine, but Alyssa, if you want to correct me there, please.
I think I don't see this in terms of a hierarchy. What I am seeing is that there are ripple knock-on effects from one thing that leads to another, and it just keeps getting compounded. And one of the things that I'm in mind is that you can't see it in silos. You can't see it in a vacuum. Everything is relational, and we exist in a society that is actually relational, right? And I don't think there is a hierarchy in terms of what, but I think one of the things structurally that really, really needs to change are gender stereotypes. It is so important because we are seeing that, again, Thomas, as we were talking in a fireside chat, right? I don't know if anyone has come across Andrew Tate's video that has suddenly gone quite viral in the last couple of weeks. So there's this guy who's on TikTok, and he's become successful, and then he's saying, if my girlfriend is going to stay at home, she's going to be pregnant, she's going to give birth. chokehold, I'm going to give her 2 tight slaps, and I'm going to show her her place. And that video has gone viral. It's gone, like, boys as young as 13-year-olds are actually endorsing the video. Teachers are getting in a frenzy. Like, how do we talk about this to our boys, to our girls, right? Gender inequality is everywhere. It's not just within certain groups. It's not in just terrorist ideologies. It's everywhere. And we need to start with changing these gender stereotypes, that it's okay to hit women, it's okay to be in a hierarchical, situation. It's okay, women are subservient, women are caring, women are nurturing, men are not like that, men can be like that, so it's I think all of that has to change. That's why it's called structural factors. Yeah.
And of course, these structural factors exist beyond terrorist groups, but also within wider society. I know, for example, Jared Crockett was mentioning the status of women in military organizations, and more specifically, how, for example, in some certain combat situations, and especially in the, let's say, logistical situations of the barracks, that these situations have not been formalized, have not been divided, the same amount of training has not been given. To which I would preliminarily agree with Jared that there is a sharp divide even in how we treat women in the armed forces. Does the panel have any comment on that? Begum, perhaps, or Amber, if you'd like to step in and show.
Yes, I want to make some comments about this. I totally agree with Gurpreet. Yes, I think the structural inequality plays a key role in the reproduction of this, the subordination of women. And I think education is really important in combating this structural inequalities. And also, if you want to internalize the idea that women and men are equal, then not only education at school, but also at the grassroots level, I think we need some kind of, in the family, this education begins. Because if I can give an example from my own country, in the traditional, paternalistic countries, the patriarchal, sorry, not paternalistic, but patriarchy is the concept that I must use. The women, yes, they are seen as not secondary, but they are like seen as they belong to the works of household. So the man, yes, they are. So I think, yes, in order to have this equality, first of all, we should educate the mothers to educate their son and other family members to see women as precious as the man. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Begum. And here we have another one of the questions from our audience today, and it has to do with Wilson Mingola's question, that he's asking, why is it that when terrorists are arrested after an act, they don't show any remorse? Most often they smile. And perhaps adding to that question is, do we see the same type of behaviors with women terrorists that have been caught after an act? Is there any disparity there in the research that you're looking at, and can we explain if there is a difference in let's say show us anything about is there any fundamental changes that we can look at between female and male perpetrators of terrorism in as far as motivation goes? And lastly, perhaps tacking onto that as well, that if there is for example, a revenge factor, it might be a difference. Do women and male radicalization as a result of revenge motivation, are they different substantially between the genders? And if anybody would like to jump in and tackle that tough question, please be my guest, Gurpreet or Amber, perhaps, if you have a comment.
Well, I think that's complex, and that's going to change variously based on who, what, where, when, and how, right? But when I think one of the biggest ways we've seen, at least recently, and view of just what I've been looking at is when we see these individuals, and this is not specifically for just extremists or terrorists. I mean, this could be applicable to really any actor who has committed an act of violence, is that when we see that lack of remorse, let's say, it's not so much that they're thinking about what they've done, they're thinking about, what does this mean for me? And that can have different motivations behind it as well. If you're looking at an extremist view, you can look at propaganda by deed. That is one of the most significant ways organizations can show their power, is by committing an act of violence. Then you add on top who is arrested, who will have a trial. And this prolongs the amount of time that they remain in the media's eye. The media and extremist organizations, they have a very symbiotic relationship. They feed off of each other. So the media gets higher ratings because, look, we're covering this exciting trial of this guy who committed an event. And then you have an organization who's reaping all the benefits of, look, they're showing why we're fighting. They're showing what has been done to us. This is why we attack this person. So it becomes less about the incident itself and more about the person, the organization, and their reasons, because it just provides more of a public eye. And that itself can be propaganda to others who have said, yeah, I kind of agree with that. Let me go online of finding these organizations. And then what happens, that sparks an individual's, or it can, not will, it can spark an individual's self-radicalization, because they're hearing something that has already fed on an internal bias or view or perspective. And then they're finding others who have felt the same way. Then they're in these chat rooms and they enter the echo chamber and they spur them on until they then want to act in that cause's name. So it's less about the attack, it's less about the individual and more about the broader picture, in my opinion.
Thank you for sharing that, Amber. And well, these have been really fascinating questions. If I might be so bold, one from me to the panel as we're speaking about this, but I know that we've mentioned about the remorse, let's say, and we've spoken a bit about revenge. But putting these together, and this is directed towards any one of you three that wants to jump in. When the media, which is what we're taking a look at with this question, the Western media takes a look at, for example, these cases like Sharon Tate or other female terrorists, do you believe it often conflates this idea that if a woman becomes a terrorist, then she must do so out of this monstrosity of revenge, out of completely misguided emotions that she could not control, and in a way playing into this myth of the woman as this irrational, emotionally driven, family protecting vehicle, and does it throw a spanner in the works? And are we just not ready as a society to understand that factors, and of course agency, used perhaps violently and illegally and horrendously, but still agency? And how do you see this dichotomy between the media and wanting to sell the classic story of its female prototype, and then is reality different from that?
I think I'm sorry, Gurpreet, were you gonna go?
Go ahead.
Okay. I think that as you said, Thomas, as a society, are we ready for that? And especially in Western media. And I'm actually going to take an example that's not a female, but Timothy McVeigh. When he was arrested after the Oklahoma City bombing, they were labeling him a terrorist, and Western society, the United States, was like, what? I see this, white, crew cut, blue-eyed, blonde guy walking down. It totally did not fit in with what the society's perception of what a terrorist should look like. So that sparked a whole, what happened to him and how did this happen and all of that. And I think that same wonder, that same interest is the same when we see females rather than the traditional, male terrorist. It's not so much about the cause, but it's more about what happened to them. And this, again, like Gurpreet said, it all circles back, right, to what is that internal struggle, that internal, motivation. And I think that when we're talking about media tends to grab on to anything that doesn't fit the norm, because that's what people are interested in, and that's what gets sensationalized. And that's really how those two, organizations or individuals and the media really come together, is that mutual feeding off of each other.
Thank you for that, Amber. And Gurpreet, Begum, if you have any comment, please feel free.
I'd just like to add that exactly as you said, Thomas, that my experience is that more often than not, when you portray a female terrorist, it's always more than exactly what you said, Amber, what happened internally. But you don't really find that with a male terrorist, particularly who's a Muslim, that doesn't happen. And in the UK, those of you who are based in the UK, you might have heard, particularly when ISIS recruiting was happened, there was a 15-year-old girl called Shamima Begum. It sparked off, right, the media, the way the news reports it, Piers Morgan's famous words, right? They go there, they cook for them, they clean for them, they bear their babies, they marry them. To them, I say, go F yourselves, right? The whole narrative is structured around she's a mother, she's a wife, she's this. And it is always personalized on that level. And in all of this, I think two factors get forgotten. One is that when someone is recruited as a 15-year-old, in most countries, a 15-year-old legally is still a child. And we see that in a lot of international criminal law cases where, particularly the Ongwen case that's that's still going on, I think, in the ICC, that what happens when you have a child actor who then perpetrates crime, right? With female terrorists, what I've noticed, it becomes so sensationalized that aspect actually gets completely drowned out, that someone who was groomed or taken in at 15 was legally a child. And the agency that happens later on, or when women are recruited as adults later on, their agency, their political agency is then couched as revenge. I'm a mother. My whole family was decimated, this, that, So I agree, Thomas, a lot of it. In fact, it's very rare to find, a depiction, or, when you talk about ISIS or, female terrorists within them, something that is not sensationalized. And these two factors are considered. So yeah, just my 2 cents worth.
Thank you for that.
Absolutely. But I would like to add in, because you brought up a really good point, is that when especially young girls are being recruited, I mean, that grooming process is continuous, and that grooming process, especially of young girls, We see that in terrorist organizations, we see it in cults, we see it all over, to where you're taking somebody who, okay, has like an idea of the world, but they're not an adult. They don't have that, you know, that sense. And a lot of them have that lack of self-sense to recognize it and back away. And unfortunately, it happens when it's too late. And so it's really, it's like you said, it gets sensationalized, and what needs to be over there to like have their babies, exactly what like you said. So completely agree.
Thank you both Gurpreet, Amber, and of course Begum for answering these questions. Sadly, that's all we have time for today, but well, this has been a really enlightening event today, and I think we've unearthed together a little bit here that there is a regressive, biased narrative of women, not only in security, but also women in terrorism. And there's many barriers to overcome, lots of work to be done, but I wanted to thank the panel for being part of that change.